All right. Well, the energy is exciting. Okay, time for some report outs. Wonderful energy. Thank you very much. Table 1 would like to have a great thanks to whoever else opened the Table 1 document and started populating it. They are really proud of your work, but whatever table, Table 1 was just commenting in real time about how brilliant this other table was, but it was anonymous, and they have no idea who it was. But from what we can tell, you simply added to Table 1's great work, and they're perfectly happy to take credit for it. So that's all good. So we have time for, so it's funny, but the next time that we go through this, of course, please make sure you look at your table number and open that table number document going forward. And also, can we have a round of applause for the e-scribes who have like the most... It is an incredibly powerful but daunting job, right, to try to listen and capture in real time the discussion. The e-scribes really need to be done. And the e-scribes, please feel free to ask someone else to be the e-scribe the next round. This was not a commitment for the entire day for all 3 rounds, right? So everyone should try to spread that around as best they can. If you'd like to be the scribe for the whole day and your table would let you do that, that's fine too. But I don't think it's fair to ask one person all day to do this every time. So let's try to make that spread around. So we have time for 3 quick tables to present their findings and inspire us, and we'll have some reaction, and that will flow into the more moderated plenary session where we'll continue to develop those ideas and new ones as you bring them up. But I think it's encouraging to see some of the cross-fertilization and how different tables approach the same exercise on the same topic, probably with very different results, right? To give us a sense of the diversity of thinking and the diversity of where we're going, and also see if you come up with some of the same things that we know that many of you thought the same topics were really critical. That's also great learning. So either way, it's fantastic. Who would like to start? Is there anyone in particular who would love to be the first table to get the accolades of everyone else in the room of your courage and your and your efforts? Anyone want to go? Right here, Donna. Table 1, who wants to take credit for everything? So Donna, you can either come up to the podium or you can stay seated, whichever you prefer. And Melvin, if you can bring up the Table 1 Google Doc, I think we said you could do that. And then 75%. All right. So Donna, wherever you're most comfortable doing the presentation from, is this format okay with you?
Yes, I'm fine, and I'll just present on the first point, which is what we actually worked on. So we focused on natural history of disease condition, and in terms of stage setting, the purpose and use and potential impact for information, for this natural history of disease information, was to be able to guide the development of needed biomarkers, the development of the business case, and seeing what the market looked like, the potential patient population and the characteristics thereof, the value and timing of interventions across the life cycle of the disease and the patient, and the time frame of the study. Is it a 2-year study for something fast progressing? Is it a 10-year study needed? Does it need to be a long-term outcome study, or could there be other endpoints that are mixed in? And then I think there was a helpful addendum on linking the patient phenotype and genotype. So thank you, Table 8. What have you? And so in terms of the methods for collecting this information, social listening, interviews, qualitative interviews, surveys, and we'll discuss in the next section sort of the type of surveys, maybe digging in a little deeply. Certainly the presentations that we were given before were very helpful to informing that. Data sources, registries, published epidemiology studies, biobanks, claims data at EHR. We wanted to make sure to call out the increased use of those data sources. Although certainly the extent to which they can be fully leveraged is still being developed. In the terms of identifying gaps and barriers, we did discuss the limitations of prospective versus retrospective registries and using data and questions that were not built for a purpose. The experience of healthcare may determine have an effect on the natural, or how at least the natural history of the disease is being recorded, whether it's socioeconomic or racial and ethnic or other types of health disparities that may have created differential experiences with the healthcare system. The representative, nature finding a representative patient sample of those living with the disease. And finally, we did discuss and that sort of bled over into the impact of cultural values on the experience of disease. We addressed that through the sort of healthcare disparities lens. And in terms of target audience and stakeholders for future research, we're thinking about the difference between the target patient audience and people living with the disease in particular, the value of their caregivers as well, adding to this, and then the silent patient majority, tapping into that for those who are not yet connected to types of research. So.
Wow, what a rich discussion and so many things to do. Do you want to go on to any other lines, or do you want to stop at that one?
I'll stop at that and cede the floor to others.
Great, very full. Congratulations to that table, huh? Great work. Also, as coaching this second column of non-scientific and technical, this column, they're great scientists, love to see everybody focused on the technical and the science, right? But there's also social and behavioral barriers, right? How do we collaborate? How do we work together on some of these things? Are there other legal issues that have to get resolved for that? So that's why we had this second column here as well, which I'm not sure many people got to, but oh, you did. They did. So I didn't mean to cast aspersions on anyone. Which is that. Kevin, you want to do a follow-up for your table? That's great. Everyone should.
Yeah, just to expand upon the non-scientific technical, I'll draw upon my experience in the area of Fabry disease. And in so many communities that they have not had a disease, unfortunately, self-medicate, they don't have, they're most empowered. And I think many times you come into those communities, you need to understand who you're working with and the time it may take to build that.
The time, the relationship,
but
and the confidence.
It's as important factor, I think, as any other one, though.
Excellent. Comments and reactions to this kind of work. In the back, I'm sorry, I don't see your name card and I don't hear.
Sorry, Joey Mattingly, University of Maryland. And this may just be a comment for the overall spreadsheet. I just kind of noticed that a column called non-scientific and technical then being related to social and behavioral science. It is science. And so now.
Yeah, all right. So you got me. I'm trained as a chemist, all right? So,
but
I meant more of the collaborative and organizational issues.
I fell prey to it too. I jumped in right away and started talking about contextual issues and other social and behavioral, and then didn't realize that I'm putting it in a non-scientific column. And so maybe just for the thought is that maybe it's categorized differently, like a social and behavioral or other contextual.
And I think the other part of and learning of this is use it the way you think most appropriate, right? And apparently my chemistry background is wrong, right, for this thing, and so use it appropriately. So that's great, Joey. Thank you so much. So other comments on process or content? Yes, over here, please.
Well, just perhaps under the non-scientific and technical, one of the red flags that went up for some of us at our table was that there's a bit of a patient burden in the patient privacy area. And how do you balance, having a device in your home and the privacy, being a normal human being every day, doing normal things that maybe you don't want to share. And so that privacy issue came up, and I wonder if that's probably valid in every category and something that we should keep under consideration for patient privacy.
That's a great point. And that's also why, if you've noticed, we have some flip charts on the side talking about additional issues and things. So as some of you see these and it doesn't quite fit into your templates, if over breaks or even in the midst of thinking at the table, walk up and add some things to this flip chart over here as well, right? Or find a way to squeeze it on the current template. This is excellent. The templates are meant to be guides, not constrainers, but yes, it does keep us a little task focused as well. So we're trying to hit that balance. Wonderful thoughts. So let's give a round of applause for table 1 and also the comments. Is there another table that would like to present some of their thoughts? So here in the middle. So you're welcome to come up to the front if you like, and could you let Melvin know what table number you're at there? It's table 5, correct?
Table 5.
Table 5, Melvin, if you can bring that up. And are you happy there, Jay, to
Yeah,
present?
we had I'll be frank, we had a little bit of trouble sticking to this format, but nevertheless, we did identify a really important gap.
Great. That was the most important
I'm
thing.
going to kind of frame the discussion, and I'll ask my table colleagues to please chime in if I'm missing anything. But essentially, we did not delve into any of these subcategories. We really looked at more broadly this opportunity to understand the patient experience and with the disease and the medical condition for a variety of different purposes, everything from preclinical to drug development and also HTA as well, like using data to actually make coverage decisions and those sort of issues. And the method and the data source that was brought up by my colleague Robert McBurney here that's really lacking is the data that's collected in clinical care, so particularly like in the EHR. And the relevant issue is that there's essentially not patient input into the data that's collected, right, into clinical care, which has a huge impact on the ability to really get good comprehensive data, particularly for a number of conditions where you don't have like very sophisticated advocacy organizations working in this space. So we felt that that was a huge scientific and technical gap.
And also medical practice and EHR collaborations.
Yeah,
right?
and then there's just the issue of even trying to integrate other data sources into that. But really making sure that during the clinical encounter that you can capture this patient important data.
And do we need to scroll down a little bit? It looks like it goes down a bit more. Is there more we should see beneath clinical and professional? There we go.
So
nope, I think it's just that line, right?
Really, I mean, the issue around this is obviously you have a number of different stakeholders who have a number of different priorities, right? Particularly when it comes to collecting data. I mean, health systems are trying to improve quality. You know, systems and providers need to get paid, so you need to collect data that can actually turn into. So it's really trying to convene all of these different the non-technical issues, trying to convene all these stakeholders and kind of like with patients come to some sort of pragmatic way of collecting some of this data.
That's just great. Rob, you want to jump in and support your table member there?
Yes, I'd just like to say that we should ask question 0, which is what are we trying to achieve? Yes. What are we actually trying to achieve here is improving the healthcare and quality of life of people with medical conditions. And if you like, that to a large extent happens in the care setting. And if we get the care setting right, then we'll know what we need to do in the development of new medicines and devices, etc., along the way, because we'll know what will be integrated in the care setting. And that's an enormous barrier.
Yes,
because it involves all of these stakeholders buying in at the end of the process. And Rob, physicians are the ones that have no time to buy into anything.
And I'm so glad that you spoke up, and that's on the transcription, and that's what we were hoping we'd get in those first couple columns is sort of that why, and you just filled in verbally on the transcription now the sort of greater context as well for this very important issue. What a great job from this team. Questions from others? Oh, you were ready to applaud, Ron, but it's question time too. All right, so any other questions, comments, add-ons to this? Yes, in the back, Brett.
John Bridges, Johns Hopkins University. I think the why has to be simpler than that. You know, I have probably been noted for thinking outside of the box and having big dreams for a very long time. But now the rubber hits the road, and I think the focus is, if we're going to provide science, to whom are we providing it for? And I think we have to start asking smaller questions such as, do you want this data? How will you use this data? What's the politics and gestalt that is affecting the way that you use this data? And that's the simple thing. You know, we've had big dreams. We've had people that have changed paradigms. I think the question now is actually getting down and doing it. And I think the end user, understanding the end user, yes, patients are end users, et cetera, but of the science, we don't really have a good understanding of the end user yet.
Yeah, so any individual study has to be very focused on those sorts of things, but nonetheless, I think understanding the broader picture as well. We're going to have this tension all day today, right? Because it's a very broad area that we're in, and we can devolve into philosophy if we're not careful, and we can also get much too detailed and just go down rat holes, right, of specificity that then aren't generalizable. So we're always going to be playing a little high, a little low throughout the whole day, and that's just going to be part of our fun. Final comments over here. So 1 and 2. So Mary, and then Lana.
I think I've been tracking, obviously, patient engagement, patient empowerment for a while. And as I was doing so, what I noticed is that healthcare is actually a little more advanced on this side than we are, because physicians have been pushed on understanding patients in ways that clinical researchers have not. And I think that's the stuff that has been done on the physician side is actually a great resource for us. I know, yes, you're right, they don't have time, but there have been a lot of things done in the physician community.
Right. So not everyone has time all the time, but there have been beautiful examples of those who made the time, and we should learn from that.
Yeah.
Wonderfully said, Mary. Lana. And then we'll move on.
Something to the additional.
Lana, could you reintroduce yourself for the transcription?
Lana Skirball, Sanofi. I just want to add something to the additional issues table, and that's workforce. Who's going to do this work? And what kind of expertise do they need to have?
Excellent point. And we're not trying to modify directly on the screen. That would be too much challenge for everyone involved, but the transcription is going to go through. Put it on the additional issues charts. Thank you. Anyone else, or is it time for pause? In the back. I'm sorry, I can't read your card.
Sure, Eleanor Perfetta with the National Health Council. I think one of the things in healthcare that we're going to have to distinguish is patient engagement in trying to get patients to be engaged in their own healthcare is very different than the kinds of patient engagement that we're talking about in terms of patients being engaged in research and medical product development. They're not necessarily different, but they have been treated differently. And so I think one of the things that we have not seen is patient engagement in the interventions used to get patients to be engaged in their own health care. So there are lots of efforts to get patients to be engaged in their own healthcare decision-making, but we have not run across any examples where patients have been part of the development of those interventions or tools or resources to help them get there. So I think we have to be conscious of the fact that the term gets used in a lot of different ways, and we should be careful of that.
And you've inspired two people to want to jump in right away. Yes. So Philip first and Kevin second. We're going to evolve the process here, but we're going to blend a little bit of this feedback session into the moderated plenary anyway, which is sort of building on. We'll sort of seamlessly expand and go on because this is so rich, I don't want to cut it off.
So building off the last comment and one earlier about kind of the medical workforce. So we do have, decades of examples of community members in service of community partnered science actually being deeply involved in protocol development, research, question development, analysis, reporting. So I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the community engaged science field that we don't have to necessarily reproduce for patient engaged science. And secondly, thinking about the medical profession, having training or been trained on kind of patient and community engagement, there are also systemic levers that I think we should attend to in thinking about how to get some of this preclinical data via community health needs assessments, partnerships with public health entities, right? Not-for-profit hospitals do this now every 3 years. There's a treasure trove of data from a systemic level about how institutions that are largely responsible for this science are engaging with communities that could facilitate the work of patient engagement as well.
Excellent, Philip. Kevin, you're next. See, I did it with my back to the whole group, too.
Yeah, I just like to add a comment. We're talking about patient engagement, and I think that's one of the most overused terms I think I've heard. And I just, a little bit of caution is that my experience working in both industry, myself as a patient, and working on my own as a consultant, is most people don't understand patients. And I think we need to operate with the assumption that people do not understand the group they're serving. So.
Okay, so Kevin and Philip, building on both of that, how do we turn that into a research recommendation? So brilliant insights and points, but our goal here today is how do we turn that into a research? Do you have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, the priority needs to be understanding patients. I mean, patient insights. And so all of this is that there always has to be, any endeavor, there has to be a commitment to understanding patients and patient insights in terms of research. And challenge people that say they think they understand it, and most times they don't.
Right, so challenging people. So the research into even, has anyone done research as to caregivers, researchers, physicians who think they speak for the patient and then checking with the patient? I believe there's a body of evidence with that, right? And that's usually pretty broad. But I'm a health economist as well, so we call that an agency problem, right? I don't know what term you use in your field. So is there a research gap in doing that, or is it a publicity and just a methodology and enforcement gap? If we're going to ask for research, it sounds like this is a well-researched phenomena, right? Is there still a gap, or is there an enforcement of the standards that needs to be done? Where do you want to take this?
My opinion, it's a priority in terms of research. It's not a research priority.
I saw your hand go up, but I thought I walked over someone else. Was there someone else in the queue beforehand? Okay, please, then Mark.
Mark Danthi, Every Life Foundation. I think to build on Kevin's point, it would be interesting to see this exact same day repeated minute by minute, but fill the room with every chair of patients and see what the outcomes are and see point by point throughout the day, are their answers the same as ours? And I would absolutely say there would not be. And that's why I would urge that this type of event, this type of day, occurs over and over again with the broad spectrum of patients.
Excellent point. Both critical and constructive at the same time. That was masterfully done. Mark. Over here, Joy, please introduce yourself to the group.
I'm Joy Simham from the National Breast Cancer Coalition, and I would echo what you just said. And when you use the word patient, you have to include healthy people too, because the desire of the type of data that needs to be gathered is going to be very wide. And again, the desire for privacy is going to be wider along that spectrum too.
Excellent point. Anyone else want to add on to this? Please, in the back. I'm sorry, was it John?
Yeah, I'm still on. I think we have to be careful about saying if we do it in a room of patients, they'll come up with something very different. Having done this over the last 10 years, I see Andrea there, we've done it with the group of patients, and you'd be surprised how similar their objectives are to our objectives. And I've done that in maybe 10 different diseases. So we have to be careful about rhetoric versus empirical. And so I think some of these questions, we need more empirical case studies demonstrating the difference. Like, so for example, cultural differences. Most of the work that I've done hasn't identified cultural differences. People all around the world want the same things out of drugs, generally. Yet we'll sit in a room and say, we've got to account for cultural differences. So when we make claims, try to move away from rhetoric and try to start using evidence and experience.
And that's the theme I'm hearing from all of you throughout the day is how do we elevate this field that it's less lore, right, and opinion, and more quantitative and defensible in challenge, right? So here we've just had challenge of, is it patient-oriented or patients really different or not? We've heard both views, right? And yet there's reference to literature, but how methodologically do we resolve the difference other than just having experts debate each other that they're more expert than others, right? Kevin?
Maybe part of my experience, I'm basing mine upon the area of kidney disease, and there is lots of empirical evidence where there's a disparity between the outcomes that patients want versus physicians. And so the objective data is, it's actually called the SONG Initiative, and it's actually led in Australia. So just speaking for kidney disease, there is data.
There is data.
A lot of data.
And it's about how to use that data and publicize it. So that may also be an area of research. I'm asking the group, right? Because I'm not an expert in this field with you. Is there science in how one disseminates the science? Because it appears that some people know that the science exists and others don't, and then it gets to be hard. And we'll get to you in just a second after I get, is that a direction to go or not, right? It's perfectly capable to say no, right? But quick show of hands, the science of disseminating science, is that an area? I see a minority of hands, but not the majority. Sort of skeptical. Great. Okay, Laura? And could you use the microphone and identify yourself, please?
Laura Lee Johnson with the FDA. I would not use the word quantitatively. I would say rigorously.
Ah, better word. Thank you. Thank you for that ad. Any other ad that you'd like to do? The joy of sitting in the front. You can read my handwriting, which is a difficult thing. So in the back, Rick, and then Teresa, and then up here to Marilyn, and then back to Brett. Thank you.
So Dick Welke is for a couple of quick points. In thinking about healthy patients and sick patients with identified disease, I wonder how much data we really have on those patients in that intermediate zone where they're trying to figure out what they have. Because they're not in a registry yet, they don't have an identified disease, but that's quite an important part of the journey for a lot of patients, is figuring it out and what their issues are. Maybe an important treatment phase too. And so that's one. I would say rigorous and quantifiable, especially when it comes to unmet need, because we get a lot of sort of qualitative data where we don't really understand very well the prevalence of those issues, and I think it's real important to be able to, we were talking about unmet need, sort of quantify the different pieces of the unmet need that in that patient experience.
Excellently said, right? So we'll do Teresa, Marilyn, Brett, and then back over here, and I'm sorry, it's Luther, is that correct? Thanks, Luther, and then put your card up so I don't forget. Teresa?
So just reacting a little bit to the idea of having a lot of meetings where you include a lot of patients and healthy and sick at the same time. And, one thing I think we heard a lot in those meetings we've had, and we hear when people have a lot of time to talk about who have a disease, that is that they, in the healthcare system or wherever, they don't always feel a great deal of respect for them, for their condition, and for their time. So one of the things that I think we're trying to do is be respectful of their time. And I think one thing we don't want to see is everybody rushing out to go talk to patients, and kind of to what end? I mean, the other thing is being really clear about the objective of engaging patients. What are you going to do with that? That people would ask us, what are you going to do with this information? Because they have a life to live, they have a disease to manage, a life to live, a family to raise, and they can't take time off to go do this all the time. What are we going to do with it so that we're able, maybe systemically, build on, not have people constantly repeating the same work in a disease area, but find some way to have a shared body of work and repository so that we don't keep revisiting the same questions, and we're sparing and respectful of people's time.
So as part of building a research agenda, would that be trying to build some kind of a coordinated set of studies, or at least some? So I'm in the genomic space at times.
A repository
of
findings
NCBI,
and tools and so on.
So that would be perhaps a research agenda. Not that all research would have to be part of that, because you need the creativity, but at least there might be a core, I think. So I saw Marilyn, Brett, Luther, and then Jessica.
Okay, thanks. Marilyn Metcalf, GSK, and on behalf of a couple of us at the table here, we appreciate the fact that patients are in the room now, and we think there is a place for this broader discussion among functions. I'd say one of the things that we've flagged up is that we don't have everyday healthcare providers here. And that has been a difficulty over and over in similar kinds of efforts that I've been in, that we don't seem to find a good way to reach them and bring them into this discussion. So I think there is a place definitely for patient forums, as Teresa's pointing out, not too many of them, not overburdensome, but with very set goals and agendas for what's going to happen next. But then I also think just having that everyday healthcare provider perspective and a way to move that part forward is going to be a very important piece in making this happen for all the reasons that have already been discussed.
So let's identify that as well as just sort of a research gap, that we don't have that provider resource, right? And it's difficult to recruit, and that might also be something the research agenda might be able to provide. Brett over here, then Luther, then Jessica. And then further back. This is great. As soon as one's down, another one comes up. So then we'll go to Jennifer.
I'm being usurped. So.
I'm just going to say one quick thing. So I am from the Association of American Medical Colleges. I'm happy to help convene. We work with many scientists that are in the patient and community engaged research space. They are deeply involved and engaged, so happy to make those connections.
Excellent. Thank you. And Brett, now it's actually your turn.
Now it's actually Brett Hauber, RTI Health Solutions. I had two thoughts. One in response to what Laura Lee said, and then what Dick said. I like the word systematic in terms of the type of evidence that we're trying to get. The other stuff is too specific. What we want to know is what's actually happening. So systematic is the word that comes to mind for me. But the other, with regard to engaging patients, there's been a lot of work that has been done that is admirable, a lot of it done by John Bridges and his work, and I've had the experience with the Michael J. Fox Foundation of really having patients as research partners, not as advisors, not as subjects, not as tokens, but really as research partners. The experience that I had most recently with the Fox Foundation just blew my mind, because I come in with a certain set of assumptions, and I think everyone in this room comes in with a certain set of assumptions. So one of the, maybe it's an unmet need, but I think one of the things as we talk about a research agenda is to really have patient scientists as part of that research agenda. And it's been alluded to here, but they're not just coming and sharing experience, they're actually designing and doing the research with us. It's a new paradigm. It's not brand new, but it's not the common. It's not what we see, though, every day in drug development. That's what's different.
Part of a research agenda might even be a funding and training process for engaging patient scientists. Perhaps. I'm trying to, again, turn this into what would you propose to a research agenda making body? So it's part of that. Was this a quick follow-on to this statement, or okay? So we'll do a quick follow-on. Then it's Luther's turn, and then we'll go around to Jessica and Jennifer.
Carlin Schrader, Parkinson's Foundation. We do have a training program for people with Parkinson's.
Please speak in the mic, not to me. I'm just wandering around.
We have a training program for people with Parkinson's and their care partners to prepare them to engage in this way. I think other disease areas have similar training programs as well. And we also train researchers in how to do patient engagement and research. So I think models exist out there in many different disease areas that we could build on.
Okay, we can build on and scale up and industrialize, right? Luther, we're finally to you, and then we have Jessica and Jennifer. Am I missing anyone else? John.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
William, thank you. I'm sorry. And over here, Suzanne. Well, this is just exciting. I shouldn't stand in the middle all of a sudden. So, Jessica, please.
No, Luther.
Oh, Luther. I did say Luther.
Okay, finally. Luther Clark at Merck, and I think my comment is a follow-up on Roberts and some of the others that were made. And this, to the extent that certainly one of our ultimate goals is to improve health outcomes. And we know that there are differences in outcomes, some of which are based on ethnic and cultural aspects of a disease. So in terms of a research agenda, a couple of things that I think we need to consider. One is to what extent do these differences reflect scientific or medical issues versus others, such as social determinants of health? And in the methodologies that are selected, which of these methods are sensitive to issues of diversity and disparities as we move forward with them?
Excellent points. Now, you've noticed the queue is getting longer, so that means your comments have to be pithy, short, and on point, so everybody's going to get a shot, right? So, Jessica, you're up next. Did I miss someone? And Lynn's in the queue. Thank you.
Yeah. Jessica Scott, GSK. Just wanted to add to this respect for patients and the co-creation comment from RTI, that this is all about the science of patient input. When we get input from patients, I think out of respect and moving forward together, that we share the results of how it mattered, how we used it, back with those who contributed. And that transparency will help us move forward with trust and co-creation together, that I think it's valuing the time and effort that we've gotten from the input.
So again, to turn this into a recommendation, is this leading towards a scientific standard and that this is an expectation? And did you have a quick follow-on to that, Arthur, or you're just in the queue? All right, so I hear that the queue, quick follow-on to that, or a different topic? All right, a very short, quick one, and then we're going to go around the room to all the people who are in the queue.
Okay, so quick follow-on to that comment. I do think it's really important that all of us, as we improve the science of collecting and engaging for getting patient input into drug development, that we are able to publish the impact that it has made. Because I think a lot of people will say, and I know all of my colleagues in this room will say, how many meetings have we had to validate the patient, the science of, and the impact that the patient experience can have on drug development, but I don't see enough of publishing what that impact has been.
Great point. Fantastic, thanks so much. So we have Jennifer, John, we're coming around to Arthur. I think I've missed someone on this table, William. So we're just going to sort of go around this way. I think that's roughly the order in which they came up, right? And Jessica, you've had your point, so put your tent down so I don't get confused, please. Arthur? A quick follow-on. Oh, but you want to keep your card back up in a minute?
No.
Okay.
My question was about that.
Okay.
So that's exactly what I was thinking, and that is, are there studies that are there RCTs that have shown when you take patient engagement, patient considerations into account, that it makes a difference compared to when you don't? I mean, it's all. I believe that it makes a difference, all of that. But are there studies that show that?
So rather than asking
RCTs
for all of you to respond to that, we'll just say that's the point. And that was for transhuman. That was Arthur Stone speaking. So Luther, quick follow-up, because John's waiting really patiently, but his patience is about to wear out on me here.
So a quick follow-up, actually, based on the comment that was just made, and it has to do with when we're looking at the science of patient input and patient engagement, how do you factor into this issues of trust, mistrust, and trustworthiness, which I think is quite important.
Excellent point. John, fine. Did I skip Jennifer? I'm so sorry, Jennifer. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is a team effort to keep me on track, so thank you all for all participating.
I just wanted to make a quick point. We've brushed on this, but haven't explicitly talked about sample bias and who's participating in the patient input. So especially as we're collecting a lot more from online resources or having people come in to provide input, a lot of people who we have access to aren't necessarily represented, and we've talked about representation a little bit, or even people who have a more severe disease. Maybe we bring them in after they've recovered, but having access to them as they go through this, I think we haven't necessarily addressed including that.
Wonderfully said. Thank you. John, am I in order now, finally?
I'm not going to even comment on that.
Oh, well, thank you. I was hoping to push some of my responsibility to you, and you bounced it right back to me. A wise man.
So I wanted to come back to this theme of training patient or provider input and patient scientists in the engagement. And I think one of the gaps that we have to struggle with here is the balance, basically, of, for want of a better way of putting it, trained versus untrained input. And we, because there's both classes of folks, and I would imagine that there's biases that are introduced the more we train patients or providers in the context of what we're doing. Yeah, the input might be a little bit more on point, but it might be on point in a biased way that we need to really balance out, and then outreaching into the community more broadly. I think, something that we shouldn't lose sight of.
Very good. So this is, again, getting to both methods and which methods are fit for which uses in which contexts, right? I think some of that. Mary, just as a quick follow-up before we go over here. All right. Is that okay?
That's
Mary,
right.
go ahead. And please introduce yourself, because I'm saying things, but the transcriptionists are going to have trouble.
Oh, okay. Mary Tobin Akers. When I started our patient empowerment initiative, the person that I most relied on was Jack Whalen, who some of you probably know, and unfortunately we lost him. But his answer to that was that we need to develop not so much patient advocates all the time as research advocates, and that you have to balance the understanding of what the whole research process is, but keeping deeply in mind the patient perspective.
Good build and add. Thank you. William. And then we're coming across, right? Arthur's longer there, but we have like the whole table one over there wants to talk. Okay.
Bill Riley, National Institutes of Health. So from this consideration about sort of more systemic ways of gathering patient input in treatment development, I'll draw from those non-scientific social and behavioral research areas. So behavioral intervention research typically, or development, typically involves patients early on and throughout the process in that process. In the community intervention world, there's been over a decade of community-based participatory research. I think there's probably methods, procedures, designs that we could borrow from some of those as we look at sort of how do we gather patient input in drug and device development.
You should contribute. Thank you very much. Suzanne.
Hi, Sue Schrant from the Arthritis Foundation. This builds on about 4 different comments, but about it's a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless, that we actually have a whole bunch of great examples. So we've got PCORI. I don't think we have anyone from PCORI in the room, but do we? Oh, okay, great.
Well, so she was technically correct.
So,
we have no one from PCORI in the room.
Yes. But I think examples from PCORI, we've heard about Michael J. Fox, Parkinson's Arthritis Foundation has work in this space. So I think the challenge is, how do we harness that and curate it in a usable way? Because right now it just feels like the wild, wild west, and it's drinking out of a fire hose. So I think we need a way to curate and harness what we're already doing and learn from it and share.
So what I'm hearing you all say as well is in this theme of perhaps industrialization that Teresa brought up, a way not just to do individual studies, but connect studies and build on studies and even combine data, which is a very difficult thing to do, of course, with methodologies that are comparable. But it's what I hear you talking about. So, Andrea, do you have a very quick follow-up on that? I think you were whispering to me on the side, but I want to get that
Hi,
in quickly.
Andrea Ferris from Longevity Foundation. So we've been working with John Bridges on a patient preference study in lung cancer. And personally, I just have a different perspective. I don't think we should call them patient scientists. To us, they're patient partners, and it's really the patients who are driving the whole process. And so we might want to also consider looking at the body of evidence or people who have done this well, where they have harnessed the patients to drive the process, to drive the study, to be really the drivers of it, because they are out there. And I mean, John, you're expert at it, and we've seen the results of it. So it's not you're not training the patient, but you're partnering with them to do this on their behalf.
And perhaps what we're discovering is there's many roles and things. Just like we don't have one type of academic, we have many types of roles that we need to get richer in our nomenclature around patient scientists. Were there quick follow-ups and rebuttals to that point? I saw lots of hands come up. So why don't we start over here, and then we'll eventually get to Donna and everyone else here. And Lynn.
So
your follows right up with hers, so why don't you say that,
yeah.
And then we'll have the quick follow-ups, Lynn,
Yeah.
because you've been waiting.
Carol Meyer from Takeda Pharmaceuticals. I think one of the things, as we've been talking about this whole idea of understanding what matters most to patients, is something that as an industry we should be challenging ourselves to do pre-competitively. And so there's been a lot of good examples over the last year where we've been able to do some of this pre-competitively, but we need as pharma companies to figure out a way to do that, especially looking at it from a disease area perspective, so that as we dig into our research programs, we're really focusing on the same source of data.
Excellent. Lynn Hager, and then there were a number of others. So I see Lon in the back. I see Joey. There was another hand I thought here in the back, and Ron. All right, so we'll try to get all those comments in, and then eventually Donna, who's waiting so patiently, and Matt. We'll get in there.
Thanks. Lynn Hager from AstraZeneca. So I just kind of wanted to follow up on some of the points that were made about patient scientists, patient partners, and how valuable that is. We've had a patient partnership program now for about 2 years. They feed input and co-create with us from our clinical studies all the way to our marketing and commercial folks. And just the impact that they have, the value that they have, being able to give back that information to them at the end of the year. And I can't stress enough, something that we haven't captured is making sure that we engage these people early. So it's not even in phase 2B or 3 clinical studies. It's bringing them in right at drug development to co-create, but also continuity. Keeping those same people over and over so they have a stake in what we're doing. They understand. I mean, bringing someone in for a one-off focus group, if they're there, they're gone, and you don't have that kind of depth of information.
So Lynn, taking that then to a research recommendation, so that's a great point. Is there something you would recommend as a larger research agenda initiative or program around that point?
Yeah, I mean, the program that we've been doing successfully is having patients as partners, specifically in every disease area, where you have patients that really are able to give you that depth and breadth of knowledge.
So the recommendation might be to actually create standing groups of those that are national resources.
I would think so, yeah.
And then I'm trying to turn this into something big and fundable for pre-competitive consortia and others, not just individual study best practices.
Having that available to the greater good would be fantastic.
Okay. Yep. So on this table, I think we had Lana and Joey, and Mary, we'll get to you in a minute because Ron's in the queue. This is all supposed to be, remember, Donna and Mats are waiting very patiently for their big topic. So this has to stay on this very specific topic if you can, because I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a big research agenda here and a lot of players in this. I want to talk about not just publication, but data sharing. The rate limiting enzyme here is patients. And if we're all doing research on the same set of patients, the patients are going to get pretty tired pretty fast. So how do we do more than just publish our outcomes, but actually publish our data so that we can interrogate each other's resources? This should raise all boats. It shouldn't be, at least in my perspective, I'm not speaking for Sanofi particularly, but I don't think this is commercial confidential information. It should be information that everybody should be able to use, and not just the outcomes of the research, but the data itself.
Great. Thank you. Good points. We have a lot of people in queue, so again, 15, 20-second comments if we can. Thanks.
Again, this is Joey, University of Maryland. I was just going to comment that I don't think it's really hard to the comments around, which really get into culture, and that is, do we do some symbolic things where we start with the patient voice at the beginning of our meeting, or we start with a patient story? Do we incorporate, do we call them partners? Do we call them scientists? What we do. So I'm a newer investigator, but maybe it's the naive component, but what I'm seeing is that it's actually not that hard to ask patients to get involved and to then you have to systematically put them on the agenda, and you have to systematically include, don't pay them differently if you have an advisory board. Do not pay your physicians more than your patient advisors. Pay everyone the same. So there's some very symbolic things that can be done, but I don't think it's very difficult. So
there were a couple policy recommendations in those best practice orders. So we have Ron, and then Mary wanted to get in, and then finally Donna and Mats are going to get their big points in here.
Okay.
Quick and short, Ron.
I will. So my comment's based on my fundamental conviction, and I think shared by many people in the room, that there's nothing more important in this business of drug development than natural history data. And I think that drives everything from pre-discovery insights all the way through post-market surveillance. And in that regard, there are a lot of us doing patient registries or natural history databases, and that would be greatly improved if we could incorporate into those. And here's a real research agenda. How do we incorporate into those natural history studies the kinds of technologies that others have talked about today, Michael J. Fox and Jennifer's work, in terms of reporting on how the patient feels and functions on a daily basis in the real world, as opposed to every 3 to 6 months when they come into their clinical exam. And so if we can figure out how, even in a pre-competitive space, as our Takeda colleague just indicated, we should be able to work out ways that these technologies could be brought to bear for all of us, and in a compelling way, so we can collect these data, analyze these data, and report these data to our FDA reviewers. So
And others in the community, right?
And others in the community.
Very good. So Mary quickly,
and also be able
and
to,
then Donna and Matt.
Also
Thanks.
be able
And
to
then we'll come
measure
back to you, Rosalind.
very difficult to measure things like fatigue, and people mention energy levels and stuff. We're searching for ways
Ron,
to
that
measure.
was a long 15 to 20 seconds. All right. Mary.
Mary Jobin Akers. I think one voice I'm not hearing very much, I heard a little bit from Joey, and I think is critical and is a challenge, is the research site. I mean, it's great to bring folks in for the protocol design. It's great to listen to patients on that level, but we really have to figure out how do you deal with the research site and all of this.
And is there a research agenda around how to do that?
Well, we're developing a patient measurement tool, but, I mean, I think there's lots of, satisfaction with clinical trials. So I think there's lots of research that can be done about that. But I think it's
so there could be
critical.
research about how to bring sites on is what I'm suggesting,
Well,
as opposed to
it's
just
how to-
anecdotal best practices that people
It's
pass
how
on.
to bring the patient perspective and the research site skills up to speed so that you can have
Right.
satisfaction.
But doing real research on best practice on how to do that as opposed to lore that gets passed around.
Right.
Thank you. Joy, did you have a really quick one? Because these people have been so patient. All right. Donna.
So just a...
And please identify yourself
Donna,
for
sure.
transcription.
Donna Cryer, Global Liver Institute. So to just speak to the last question very quickly, I think it's probably the more important question is to ask ourselves, what is the research side of the future, to be able to get the data that we need to answer the questions that actually matter. But what I wanted
Research
to...
side of the future, that's a really key term. Mind if I put that up on the side? That might be a
It's
great...
all yours.
great
And so I think that to address several of the points about the balance of patients and the potential bias if patients actually understand the operations, the terms like patient scientist, I think the answer really is as simple as some of the earlier statements about recognizing that patient is not one-size-fits-all terms, that what we're really talking about is being able to match different levels of patient experience and expertise to the methods that we are using. So the the patient who might be involved in a focus group or a questionnaire about their daily activities might be a different person than the patient scientist who is partnering on as the co-PI of the study. And so I think we need to be really specific about designing and naming and having the criteria for these different roles that patients do fill now, but they need to be trained and supported and equipped and recognized and compensated for the various roles that they fit, that they're filling for the different methods and part of the research enterprise. But I think we should sort of stop referring to them as just the patient as if it's referring to the same person in all these settings.
Yeah, very different sets of roles. I'm picking this up that as their involvement becomes more engaged and sophisticated, there's many different roles and levels and types. Matt, you've been the most patient man in the room so far. Must be your heritage.
That's fine. This is a little bit of a late follow-up to what Marilyn Metcalf told us about the healthcare professionals. And so I think this is kind of a proposal for the research agenda. And healthcare professionals have, for very good reasons, a lot to say about the focus of research, the content of research, and medical treatment, and how to do it and how to deliver it. At the same time, they don't have are not necessarily sharing the values of the patients. So I think it would be good to have more research. And patients they have values, but they are not always having true beliefs about what is happening to them or what is coming around the corner. So I think that part of research that one should do if one is interested in patient input and having some real impact on that, since health professionals have a lot of impact, is to run studies where you both ask patients about their needs, their expectations, how they would like to see things happening in terms of treatment, and parallel ask doctors and healthcare professionals what they feel are the essential elements in the kind of care provided. And make the comparison about how right or how wrong are the different values that may come up, and not just asking for patient input. We are running such a study on emergency care now. It's a little bit difficult to do, but we do it with difficult instruments. So I think these kind of studies could be interesting.
Right, and it has also some objective evidence as to what leads to better patient outcomes, better patient quality of life at times as well. So Jessica has her hand up in her card. I think I've missed someone else. Teresa? Yes, there's the one I missed. So we'll sort of come back to you, and you'll get final words. We're supposed to end at about 11:15. So Rosalind, you'll get final words, okay? Jessica?
Yeah. So I think this is a big gap, and it's very technical, but there's definitely a growing trend toward patients having their own data, and that's going to be a law on May 25th under GDPR and all that under the scope, the broader scope of GDPR than the current EU directive. So patients having their own data, yeah, we're sharing summarized data. We're also sharing a study set data through CSDR and other platforms, but for enabling patients to upload their own data, the portability requirement under GDPR is going to make that a mandate. So they can access it and then they can share it further in the ways that they choose. Could give us an incredibly valuable resource, but we've got to be able to know what to do with that.
And know what to do. So there's research around how to take advantage of this emerging resource.
Exactly, huge technical gap there.
Fantastic. Teresa, and then Rosalind, and then one of our co-chairs is going to wrap us up at 11:15.
Well, just a real different observation from what Jessica was just saying. In talking and hearing people talk about involving patients and along the way, starting early and continuing to have them involved, same folks, and compensation and so on. I think we always want to be a bit mindful about the question about the representativeness then of that perspective, the worry about bias over time, the worry about a conflict of interest, that to the extent that those folks become invested in a program, that they might lose their independence and they may not be representative. So always keeping in mind balancing those other potential concerns about the way that's done.
Wonderful. Rosalind, you are up and you're also very patient. Thank you.
Thank you. So Rosalind Schneider from Pfizer, Global Patient Affairs. I want to draw a distinction between what's been mentioned a number of times here as far as publishing, so that we're not necessarily only talking about peer-reviewed publications, but that we're also talking about publishing and making things public in a different way. So, for example, in patient-focused medicine development, I see Nicholas Brook is here with the Synapse platform, and being able to, in a public space, upload what we're learning and what we're all experimenting with and doing in different ways in our organizations, where we'll get to the science of patient input as we're exploring how we're using the science with patient input. I think we need to just draw those distinctions so we have some humility about where we are so that we can learn.
Wonderfully said. So, Cindy, you're going to bring us to a wrap here at 11:15. We're going to be just about right on schedule.
Great.
Thank
So
you.
I just want to thank everyone for your thoughtful input. I personally am struggling with the slide that Mark showed where you're in that place of discomfort and you're sort of like, this is amazing conversation. What exactly does it mean? Are we doing the right thing? Are we being helpful? Are we being collaborative? What's going on here? I need a bathroom break. So I just wanted to put that out there, that's sort of my experience, but I really think that this is exactly the kind of conversation that we were hoping to have and kickstart today. I just wanted to put two things on the table as we move into our next phase of the work and the next phase of our day. And the first is really thinking about, you all have talked a little bit about things you're doing in your organization or initiatives you're standing up, and that's really wonderful. I want us to try to think, how do we make that scalable? How do we bring that to scale? So I have no doubt that we have amassed some really great experts in the room who are doing really wonderful things, and not all of you got your 7 minutes. You're probably, some of you are thankful for that, to be able to present your work, but we need to think about how to bring it to scale. And so if you could just here's our example, and here's an idea about how to bring it to scale, that would be really helpful. The second piece is just really recognizing that there are some things that are just the right thing to do. I'm reminded of that quote, sort of, not everything counts can be measured and not everything measured counts. And I feel like we're kind of in that space of like, are we measuring things that matter, right? But also, do we really need to measure whether or not we're actually listening to patients and doing the work? Sort of, yes, we need some markers and some maybe indicators that some people aren't doing it. But the goal is to do it. I think about the fact that I tell my son, you can't punch somebody in the face. I'm not going to do a randomized control trial to show him that there's negative effects when you punch somebody in the face. So I think there's some element of that I just want us to attend to that are really important. So if we have things that we want to set as standards, right? Let's call it a standard and say that's not. I may need X metric or Y metric, but I don't need a whole study. I don't need to spend 10 years understanding this, and I don't expect this to evolve much. This is the standard that I would like for the world to be and our practice to be set at. And let's put that on the table, and then let's talk about what's the research, what's the thing that we need to learn over time, what's the investment that we need to make, and where do we need to direct that investment to really get to the methods and the systematic data collection that we were talking about. So I just really appreciate all your thoughtfulness. I know we really appreciate all your thoughtfulness and look forward to continued discussion.
And there were wonderful ideas brought up as you took your principles and we pressed you for research ideas. Lots of things have been captured on the screens. For those of you who are on the WebEx that's streaming, remember you have the ability to go into the Survey Monkey tool and be able to put these ideas in as well for the National Academies to consider. We are now going to break for half an hour. It's an early lunch here in Washington, D.C., so there is lunch outside at 11:15 here. We will rejoin here at 11:45-ish, and we will start the next round. Thank you all for a wonderful first session. Applause to everyone.